Hi everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today's conversation is one that I am really looking forward to because it's also just something that I relate to very much. And I know how many of you relate to this as well, because today I wanted to talk about negative thoughts. That little or big little devil voice in the mind that can sometimes take over and just cause so much fear and self-doubt and anxiety. And I think at times it can be really hard to not feel consumed by those thoughts, not feel controlled by them, and not have them affect how we feel about ourselves and how we move through the world. But at the same time, I think it is so important that we learn how to control those thoughts and how to manage those thoughts, because if you don't control the thoughts in your mind, they will eventually control you. It's really as simple as that. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to share some things that have really helped me with all of this. As always, before we get into it, I just want to say, if you enjoy my content, please feel free to support it in some way by liking the video, commenting, making sure that you are subscribed, leaving a review on Spotify and Apple Podcast. All of those things really help for me to continue to create these episodes. Thank you so much. And now let's get right into today's conversation. Chapter 1: The monsters in our mind. In my experience, when you're struggling with the negative thoughts in your mind, it can be such a mindfuck because it feels so real. Like that war that is going on within the mind feels so real, but at the same time, this enemy that you're fighting against is not really someone who you can visibly see or punch in the face or show anyone. It's within you. And so you start fighting against yourself and you become your own enemy, and you throw all of that anger and blame onto yourself, which makes the thoughts even worse. And it's just this horrible cycle that can easily spiral out of control. And so I wanted to share something that has really helped me with all of this. If you have been a part of my podcast in the past, you know how much I love visual analogies. And so for this one today, I would like us to imagine these negative thoughts that you might be struggling with as little monsters that live in your mind. So they are real and they are there and they are part of your experience, but they are separate from you in a way, as in they are not who you are at the core. They are just these monsters that live within you, but they don't really reflect who you are at the core. And I think that's the first most important thing to remember in all of this, that you are not your negative thoughts. They are simply something that you are experiencing, and that experience can be valid and shitty in its own way, but they are not a reflection of who you are at the core or what you are truly capable of. And I think it's really important that we separate those two things to not end up believing those thoughts. Chapter 2: Where are these thoughts coming from? So as babies, when we're born and we come into this world, we don't have any monsters in our mind yet. But then later on, we start to go through experiences in life, and we have moments that happen, and we have people around us, and just life happens. And so based on that, we start to have negative thoughts. And so in that moment, a little baby monster is formed in the mind, and then that little baby monster grows and gets bigger and bigger and bigger based on the more and more situations that happen in our life, until we have those big monsters in our mind, which are the ones that we are struggling with now. And because of that, some of us start to experience those monsters much later in life. Some of us start to experience those monsters much earlier in life. It all depends on what we experience. But the thing is, these monsters are much more fragile than we think they are, because they need energy to survive. In the same way that we need food, if they don't have energy to thrive on, they die. They have nothing to run on. But the thing is, we are the ones keeping them alive. We are the ones supplying them with that energy, because every time we continue to have more of those same thoughts, those monsters get energy to latch onto, and that's how they continue to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And the bigger they are, the more real they feel. So let's say one of the many thoughts in your mind, so one of the many monsters that you struggle with, keeps telling you that no one is ever going to love you because you actually don't deserve to be loved. That's just something that you struggle with in your mind. But that also probably means that at some point, something in your life happened that made you think that thought. Could be at any point. And then you weren't aware of what was going on because you weren't aware that in that moment, a little baby monster was formed. And so you continue to go through life experiencing more situations that made you have that thought based on the life that you've lived. And every time that happened, that little baby monster was like, yeah, every time that little human has that thought, I can just grow bigger and stronger. That's exactly what I want, because this is the story that I thrive on, which in the end is all I want. And so that's how it happened. That's why now you have that big not that big baby monster, that big monster in your mind that keeps telling you that story, because that monster has had so much to eat and so much energy based on the life that you have lived and the experiences that have made you have that thought again and again and again. Because negative thoughts in that way are not really the issue. We all have a bunch of negative thoughts in the day based on what we experience and what we see, and that's life. Like, that's being human, that's moving through life. That's not the issue, because those thoughts just come and go. But those other thoughts, which are the ones that just keep coming up again and again and again, and they feel so loud and so consuming, and they keep holding us back. And every time something happens that makes us have that same thought, it's so painful. Those are mostly thoughts that we've had for a long time. It's mostly a buildup of a lot of different situations that have made us feel that way, and that have created these big monsters that run off of those stories. Chapter 3, you are not crazy. You know, when you have those specific negative thoughts that you have been dealing with for a long time, and they're just really hard, and they just make life harder than it needs to be, and they just create these stories and these beliefs that can be really hard to handle. And then at some point you start talking to people and you start to realize that not everyone struggles with that same thought. Not everyone struggles with those same thoughts. And you're like, how can that be? Those people are having similar experiences to me, and this is such a painful thought. How can that not be painful for them? And it's not because you have lost the plot, but they are all sane. It's just because based on the life that you have experienced, that monster has formed in your mind. And so now every time something happens in your life that triggers that same thought, it's really painful based on the damage that that thought has already created and the power that it now has over us, because that monster is now so huge. But that also means that those other people who are not struggling with the thought that is hard for you, guaranteed have other monsters that they struggle with, which are easier for you based on the life that they've lived. But that also means that the thoughts that we struggle with and the thoughts that keep telling us that we suck and that we're never going to get anywhere, they're not true. And that's why you can have two people, both as brilliant and both as capable, and they both go through a situation that makes them feel like, I'm a failure. Now, that one person has lived a life that has made them feel like a failure a lot of times already. And so when that situation happens, it's really painful, and they're probably going to be like, oh my God, see, it's right. I am a failure. I knew it all along. And that kind of situation can be really hard. Meanwhile, that other person who has not had to feel like a failure in their life goes through that same thing, feels like a failure, and in a couple of minutes they're like, actually, wait, you know what? This is not true. This is just something that happens. I am not a failure. I know that I'm not. And so one feels like a failure, the other one doesn't, but they are both as brilliant, as capable. They are both as amazing. They are both as much not a failure. And that's why it just means, just because a thought hurts in a way. Just because it is telling us a certain story, just because it feels real and painful and that pain is valid, doesn't mean that the story that it is creating is true or based in the reality of who we really are and what we truly are capable of. And I remember a while ago, I had a moment where I had a similar thought like that. I remember thinking to myself, Alina, if you don't start to get a hang of the negative thoughts in your mind that are telling you that you're never going to manage anything, someday you're going to meet someone and that person will be just as brilliant and just as intelligent as you, but they managed everything you wanted in life and you didn't. And the only difference will have been that that person didn't listen to those negative thoughts. I remember that idea and that visualization in my mind just haunted me. And I was like, I don't want that to happen. Like, that's really, I don't know. I remember thinking that and just being like, whoa, that's just, I'm going to pass on that one. Everything starts with awareness, I think. And so this just made such a difference for me to just learn a little bit more about where are these thoughts coming from? Why do they feel so real? Why am I struggling with them? Because otherwise, you're just continuously trying to not have these thoughts and do things to prevent these thoughts and judging yourself for having these thoughts, but not even understanding where they come from and why they feel the way they do. And I think that's such an important step. But at the same time, once I had that awareness of like, okay, why are these thoughts there? Obviously that awareness doesn't stay 24/7, but at least you understand why it is the way it is. Then I was like, okay, now I know that, but I want to make sure that now this is not where I stay. I don't want to use this understanding as a justification to keep spiraling in these thoughts. Now I understand why they're there. Now I want to learn what can I do to not feed these monsters anymore. But that is something that we don't have time for today because time is running out. And so I was thinking it would be super fun to just make an extra entire episode about what are some things that we can do to actively stop feeding those monsters, meaning actively stop or control or manage or minimize the negative thoughts in our mind, because there is so much that can be done and there is so much that is possible there. And so I would love to make an episode about that. Let me know if that is something that you are interested in. But for now, for today, that is all I wanted to share. Thank you so much for tuning in and being here. And I'm very much looking forward to connecting with you in my next episode.